Welcome back to the Deep Dive. I want to start today with something probably in your pocket, or maybe you're even holding it in your hand right now.
Your smartphone.
Exactly, that smartphone. It's an absolute miracle of efficiency. I mean, think about it. It's a post office, a bank, a library, a cinema, and a map, all just collapsed into this little slab of glass and metal.
By every logical measure, it's the ultimate labor-saving device. It should have freed up immense amounts of our time.
It should have. And it's not just the phone, is it? Look at the last century. We invented washing machines, dishwashers, email that sends a letter across the world in, what, a millisecond?
Industrial robotics. And now we're standing right on the edge of general artificial intelligence.
We have systematically and very successfully automated what our grandparents would have called the drudgery of existence.
We have.
So here's the question. And honestly, it's a question that keeps me up at night. If we have all these incredible time-saving tools, why does everyone I know, and I mean everyone, including myself, feel more time poor than ever?
It's the central paradox of modern life, isn't it? We feel like we're constantly running up a down escalator that's just, slowly speeding up.
That's a perfect way to put it. And usually when you bring this up, say at a dinner party, the conversation gets, well, it gets a bit shallow. People get nostalgic. They say, oh, life was just simpler back then.
Or they blame a single culprit. It's social media's fault. If I just deleted Instagram, I'd suddenly have all this free time and inner peace.
Which is a comforting lie, but it is a lie.
It is. It's a very superficial reading of a much, much deeper structural problem. It's not about your personal willpower.
And that is exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to peel away the nostalgia. We're going to look past the easy answers, and we're going to examine the structural machinery of time itself.
How it gets captured.
Exactly. And we have a huge stack of sources to guide us. We're talking classic anthropology from people like Marshall Solins and Richard Lee. We've got foundational labor history from E.P. Thompson.
And then we'll bring it into the modern day with the economic critiques of the late David Graeber.
But we're going to tie it all together with a very specific and maybe a little heady systems theory lens. It's called recursive coherence.
Right. Specifically, we'll be drawing from the Unified Intelligence White Paper series by Mark and Celeria Havens. We're going to try and understand the, let's call it the physics of why our time seems to just get eaten up.
But before we can get to the physics, we have to start with the history. Because I think most of us, deep down, we carry this very specific picture of the past.
The Hobbesian view.
Yeah. Thomas Hobbes. Life in the state of nature was nasty, brutish, and short. Before the iPhone, before the factory, before even the farm, life was just a desperate, miserable struggle for survival.
That's the standard narrative of progress, right? It's the story we tell ourselves. For 99% of human history, we woke up starving. We spent 14 hours a day scrambling for a few berries or chasing a wounded gazelle. And then we just collapsed, exhausted, only to do it all over again.
And civilization, in this story, is the hero. It rescued us from that constant grind.
But the data, the actual anthropological data, it just doesn't support that story.
It says the exact opposite in many ways.
It really does. And this is where we need to be incredibly precise right from the start. The question isn't whether pre-civilized life was easy.
Right. No one's saying it was a vacation. There were dangers, disease, predators, injury.
Yeah, absolutely. The question is why modern systems, which have this unbelievable amount of surplus and efficiency, why do they so often capture more of our total time and attention than systems that were operating much closer to the edge of survival?
Okay, that's a crucial reframing. This isn't a moral argument. We're not saying let's all return to the caves.
Not at all. This is a structural question. How does the structure of a system dictate the flow of time and human obligation within it?
Let's dive right into that. Section 1, the so-called original affluent society.
This phrase, the original affluent society, it just dropped like a bomb in the world of anthropology back in the 1960s.
It came from Marshall Solins, right?
The anthropologist Marshall Solins, yes. He was synthesizing a whole bunch of new data that was coming out at the time, especially from the Kalahari Desert. He was looking at Richard Lee's famous studies of the Kung Bushmen.
And also from Australia, I think.
And McCarthy and MacArthur studies in Arnhem Land, Australia. And what they found was it was paradigm-shattering.
Now, for context, let's be clear. The Kalahari is not a lush paradise.
Yeah.
This isn't the Garden of Eden where fruit is just falling into your mouth while you lounge around.
Not even close.
Yeah.
It's a semi-arid, tough, demanding environment. If any place on Earth should dictate a life of constant, desperate struggle, it's the Kalahari.
So that's what makes the findings so shocking.
It is, because when Richard Lee actually went out there with his stopwatch, and he literally timed them day after day, he discovered something that just completely dismantled that old Hobbesian view.
He was tracking what they call subsistence activities.
Exactly. So that's hunting, gathering food, getting water, processing the food, basically all the work required just to stay alive.
And what was the number? What did the stopwatch say?
On average, the average adult spent between 12 and 19 hours a week on those tasks.
Wait, say that again. 19 hours a week.
A week.
That's a part-time job. A very part-time job.
It's roughly 2 to 3 hours a day.
Okay, I have to be the skeptic here because the listener is probably thinking exactly what I'm thinking. Does that really include everything? What about fixing your tools, or building your hut, or cooking the food you just gathered?
That is a completely fair question, and the anthropologists accounted for it. So if you add in all of that other work tool repair, food processing, general camp chores, cooking, the number does go up.
To what?
It lands somewhere around, let's say, 30 to 35 hours a week total. Maybe 40 at the high end if you include everything.
Okay, 40 hours. That sounds familiar. That's a modern work week.
But is it? Think about the modern worker. You have to count your 40 or 50-hour job. Then you have to add your commute, which can be an hour or two a day. Then you add all the household chores, the time you spend shopping for food in a giant supermarket, cooking it, cleaning up, paying bills online, managing your finances.
The life admin.
The endless life admin. When you add all that up, we are working nearly double what a hunter-gatherer in one of the planet's harshest environments was working.
That is genuinely staggering. It just doesn't seem possible. So what were they doing with all that other time? I mean, if you finish your work by, say, noon on a Tuesday, what do you do until Wednesday morning?
They lived. I mean, it's that simple. They visited friends and relatives in other camps. They gossiped. They spent huge amounts of time just talking. They gambled. Gambling with arrows or beads was a massive pastime.
They weren't just sitting around bored.
No, they were deeply engaged in social life. They played games. They told stories. They napped. They just existed. There was a massive amount of what we would call leisure, but they wouldn't have called it that.
Why not?
Because they didn't really have a separate, walled-off concept of work to contrast it with. It was all just living.
This brings us to a really crucial distinction you wanted to make. The difference between labor intensity and total labor time.
Yes, this is key.
Because I don't want to romanticize this. You know, tracking a giraffe for 10 miles in the blistering sun is not easy.
Absolutely not. It is incredibly hard. And this is where the modern mind gets completely tripped up. We confuse difficulty with drudgery.
Unpack that. What's the difference?
When a hunter's on the chase, or when a gatherer is digging for tubers in hard, impacted soil, the work is incredibly intense. It requires enormous skill, deep focus, and a high caloric output. But, and this is the absolute key, it is episodic.
Episodic, meaning it happens in bursts.
Exactly. Anthropologists call it the Paleolithic rhythm. You might have a day of absolutely heroic exertion. You track and bring down a large animal, you butcher it, you carry it all the way back to camp. That is a hard, physically punishing day.
No question.
But the next day, you don't go back out. Why would you? You have a huge supply of fresh meat. So the next day you eat, you rest, you repair your gear, you tell stories about the great hunt. You might not do any serious hunting again for 3, 4, maybe 5 days.
It's like a pulse, a big pulse of effort, followed by a long pause of recovery and enjoyment.
Pulse and pause. Whereas modern work is a flat line. It's a continuous, low to medium grade hum of obligation that never, ever stops. It's designed to be consistent, not responsive.
The Paleolithic rhythm was responsive to need. Modern work is responsive to the clock.
Precisely. And there's a deep psychological component here that another anthropologist, James Woodburn, he spotted this when he was studying the Hadza people in Tanzania.
Okay.
He noted that they possessed a fundamental confidence in nature. That was his word for it. Confidence.
Confidence in nature. What does that look like in practice? What does that mean on a Tuesday afternoon?
It meant they didn't store food at all.
Really?
No.
No storage?
Almost none. Now, to a modern economist, or even to a Neolithic farmer, not storing food looks like pure insanity. It looks like gross negligence. The immediate question is, but what if you don't find any food tomorrow?
That sounds incredibly stressful. I get anxious if my fridge isn't stocked for at least a few days.
But see, that anxiety is a product of our system. Woodburn made this brilliant distinction between delayed return systems and immediate return systems.
We live in a delayed return system.
Overwhelmingly. You work now for a payoff that comes much, much later. A paycheck at the end of the month. A degree after 4 years of study. A harvest at the end of the season. A pension after 40 years of work.
Right. The work and the reward are separated by a huge amount of time.
But the Hadza lived in an immediate return system. You go out, you get the berries, you come back, you eat the berries. The loop between effort and reward is incredibly short and tight.
And because they trusted that the environment would always have something for them tomorrow?
Storage was actually seen as a burden. Think about it. If you store a large amount of food, you now have to guard it from animals and from other people. If you have to guard it, you are now tethered to one spot. You lose your mobility.
And it creates social problems.
Huge social problems.
Yeah.
If you have a surplus, you have to create rules for who gets it, who controls it. That creates friction. It creates hierarchy. By simply trusting that the forest would provide again tomorrow, they freed themselves from what I can only call the administrative overhead of the future.
The administrative overhead of the future. That's a fascinating phrase.
Yeah.
Because that's what so much of my modern life feels like. Managing future obligations.
And they just didn't. They operated on what Solons calls limited objectives.
This gets to the economics of it.
Right. Modern economics is built on a foundational assumption, the idea of infinite ends and scarce means.
Meaning we always want more.
Yes. We assume human desire is a bottomless pit. You get a nice car, now you want a better car. You get a big house, now you want a bigger house. You get the new phone, and 6 months later you want the even newer phone. If your desires are functionally infinite, then your labor must also be infinite to try and satisfy them.
But the hunter-gatherer didn't have that operating system. They had limited objectives.
Their primary objective was, we need to eat today. Once that objective is met, the marginal value of any further labor drops to almost zero. Why would you go hunt another gazelle? You can't eat it all before it spoils. You can't easily store it. Carrying it is just a huge pain, so you stop.
It's the difference between running a race that has a clear finish line and running on a treadmill.
That is the perfect analogy. The treadmill has no built-in stop condition. You just keep going until you decide to get off or you collapse.
Which is a good place to bring in our theoretical lens for this deep dive. Recursive coherence.
Right. Let's start layering that in.
So how does this Paleolithic rhythm, this world of limited objectives, look through the RC lens from the Havens white papers?
So in the Unified Intelligence series, they talk a lot about episodic coherence. Think of it like a simple, elegant feedback loop. You have attention in the system. In
this case, hunger.
Exactly. In the white paper, The Seed, they call this tension the ache. It's not necessarily pain, it's more of a negentropic driver.
The signal that something is off balance, that a pattern needs to be completed.
Right. The system is out of equilibrium. So this ache of hunger triggers a specific directed action. You hunt, you gather, you succeed, you eat, the tension resolves, the loop closes.
The system finds its coherence again, the wave function collapses, to use their language.
Exactly. The system returns to a stable state of rest. In the Paleolithic context, you could have these moments of very high intensity, but they were compatible with huge amounts of leisure because the loops were always allowed to fully close. The ache was satisfied. The biological signal hunger was met by the biological signal satiety.
It's a clean reset.
Very clean reset.
So if that was the human baseline for something like 200,000 years, this rhythm of pulse and pause, of working hard to finish a task and then truly resting, how on earth did we break it?
Yeah.
Because presumably, we didn't just wake up one day and decide to make ourselves miserable on purpose.
No, we didn't. We just invented a tool that was supposed to help us, but which accidentally ended up enslaving us.
We invented the clock.
We invented the clock.
And this takes us straight into section 2. We're moving from the rhythm of nature to the rhythm of the machine. And our main guide here is the great historian E.P. Thompson.
E.P. Thompson. His essay, Time, Work, Discipline, and Industrial Capitalism is, well, if you haven't read it, it will fundamentally change how you look at a wristwatch. It's that powerful.
He draws this key distinction between two ways of experiencing time and therefore work. Task orientation and time discipline.
Right. Task orientation is basically what we've just been describing with the hunter-gatherers, but it applies to most pre-industrial societies, farmers, artisans, peasants.
So if you're a crofter in 17th century Scotland, or a blacksmith, You work because the task itself demands it.
Exactly. You milk the cow because the cow's udder is full and needs milking. You don't check your watch and say, oh, it's 5 p.m., time to milk. You harvest the wheat because the wheat is ripe and the sun is out. If a big storm is rolling in, you work like a maniac to get the harvest in.
And if it's pouring rain and there's nothing that can be done in the fields,
You sleep in. You mend your tools by the fire. You visit a neighbor. The task dictates the rhythm of your life. The content of the work dictates the container of time.
Okay, so that's task orientation. What is time discipline?
Time discipline, which really arrives with industrial capitalism, completely inverts that logic. The clock creates a new abstract uniform grid that gets laid over reality. And suddenly, you aren't working because the task demands it. You are working because it is 9:00 a.m.
The container now dictates the content. It is 9:00 a.m., therefore I must find something productive to do for the next hour.
Precisely. And Thompson traces the history of this shift. It starts surprisingly early, long before the factory. In the 14th century, you start seeing wealthy merchant guilds erecting huge clock towers in the middle of town squares.
This wasn't just a public service, was it? Here's the time, everyone.
No, it was a statement of power. It was a way to synchronize the labor of the entire community to the rhythms of commerce, not the rhythms of the sun or the seasons. It was the medieval version of a company-wide shared Google Calendar.
But a lot more imposing.
Much more aggressive. And then the technology shrinks. By the 18th century, the clock moves from the public town square into the private home, onto the mantelpiece. Then it shrinks again into the pocket watch.
And as the clock gets closer to the body, the discipline gets tighter.
It becomes more internalized, and now, of course, it's literally strapped to our wrists, or it's glowing on our screens, in our faces, 247. There's no escape from the grid.
And this didn't just change our schedules. Thompson argues it changed the very nature of time itself.
It changed the ontology of time. Time ceased to be something you pass through, like a river, and became a commodity that you possess.
And once it's a commodity, you can measure it. And you can sell it.
And you can spend it. You can waste it. You can save it. You can invest it. Think about that language. It's the language of currency.
Time is money. Benjamin Franklin.
Franklin is the absolute avatar of this shift. He took the old Puritan work ethic, which said your time on earth belongs to God and must be used for his glory, and he secularized it. He turned it into a principle of capitalist accumulation. If you are idle, you aren't just resting, you are stealing.
Stealing from who? From God.
You're stealing potential wages from your future self, or you're stealing actual wages from your employer who has bought your time.
So rest goes from being a neutral, necessary state of being to a moral failing.
A profound moral failing. This is a massive psychological rewrite for humanity. Before this, idleness was just a thing you did. It had no moral weight. After this, idleness is a sin against productivity.
And this wasn't just an idea. There was a real historical battle over this. Thompson describes it so well. The war against St. Monday.
Yes. We need to bring St. Monday back. It's a fantastic story.
So tell the story. What was St. Monday?
Okay, so you're in the early industrial period, late 1700s, early 1800s. You have weavers, shoemakers, all sorts of artisans who are being pulled into the new factory system, but they still have their old task-oriented habits.
They haven't been fully disciplined by the clock yet.
Not yet. So they'd work hard near the end of the week, get paid on Saturday. Sunday was the Lord's Day, so they'd go to church. But Monday was for recovering from the weekend.
The original hangover cure.
Literally, they called it keeping St. Monday. A weaver might show up, work the loom for an hour or two, and then just say, nah, that's enough for today. They'd head to the alehouse, maybe watch some cockfighting, gossip, go home and sleep. It was an unofficial but deeply ingrained cultural institution.
And the new factory owners who've just sunk all this capital into these huge, expensive steam engines, they must have been absolutely losing their minds.
They were incandescent with fury, because a factory only works if it's synchronized. The whole system is interlinked. If the weavers don't show up on Monday, the spinners have nowhere to send their yarn, the whole production line jams up, and that big, expensive steam engine is just sitting there burning coal and money for nothing.
It's an efficiency nightmare for them.
It's a total disaster. So the industrialists waged a multi-generational cultural war against St. Monday. They used fines, they used lockouts, they promoted religious movements like Methodism, which preached sobriety and punctuality. They even specifically supported schools that taught children the virtue of being on time.
So the 9-to-5, Monday to Friday work week wasn't some natural logical evolution. It was a victory. It was the result of a long, hard-fought battle between the clock and the human rhythm.
It was a conquest, and the workers fought it tooth and nail. For a long time, they considered wage labor, the very idea of selling a block of your time, to be a form of slavery. They even called it wage slavery.
Why? What was the distinction for them?
They were used to selling a product. Here's the pair of shoes I made. Pay me for the shoes. They were not used to selling their very existence for 10 or 12 hours a day.
That's a huge distinction. Selling the result of your labor versus selling your presence, your availability.
And that gets right to the heart of modern burnout, because modern knowledge work in particular extracts availability. It demands that you are there, that you are on, that you are responsive to emails and Slack messages, regardless of whether there is an actual concrete task to be done at that very moment.
Which is what leads to the performance of busyness. You have to look busy because you're on the clock. So looking busy becomes more important than actually being productive.
Because if you're not visibly busy, you're stealing time from the company. The clock god demands its sacrifice of constant attention.
So we have the clock as one of the great villains in this story. But to find the other one, we have to go back even further in time. We have to talk about what's been called the Neolithic trap.
Yes.
This is section 3, the agricultural revolution.
And again, our common sense story here is that agriculture was this brilliant innovation that saved us from starvation. And on one level, that's true. A single acre of cultivated wheat produces vastly more calories than an acre of wild forest with random nuts and berries.
It's just more energy dense.
It is. But, and here's the giant catastrophic trap, it is incredibly more labor-intensive per person.
We have some hard data on this from James Sussman's book, Work, a History, don't we?
We do. He cites studies of groups like the Hanunoo agriculturalists in the Philippines. They were spending about 1,200 hours per year just on the cultivation of their crops.
Just on the farming part.
Just on the farming part. That doesn't include the time spent processing the food, cooking it, finding water, building and maintaining the house, and so on.
And compare that again to the Kung and the Kalahari.
The Kung were doing maybe 800 to 1,000 hours a year for everything combined. Agriculture is a relentless grind. You have to clear the land. You have to plant the seeds at the right time. You have to weed constantly, which is just endless, back-breaking work. You have to protect the crop from pests. You have to harvest it all at once, then thresh it, grind it, and finally you have to store it.
It's a continuous year-long cycle of obligation.
There's always something that needs to be done.
So why on earth did we do it?
Yeah.
If you look at it from the perspective of an individual's time and effort, why would anyone trade a 15-hour work week for a 40-hour grind in the mud?
The answer is density. Agriculture can't support a better life, but it can support more life. It allows you to pack more people into the same square mile of land. It allows you to feed a village of 500 instead of a roaming band of 30.
Once you make that switch,
You're trapped. You can't go back. The land can no longer support your new, higher population density through hunting and gathering. You are locked into the agricultural system, and so are your children and their children.
And this brings us to what might be the most counterintuitive point in this whole deep dive. We have this deep-seated assumption that when a society creates a surplus, when you have extra food in the granary, that you would use that surplus to rest.
The logical thing would be to say, hey everyone, the harvest was great this year. We have enough grain stored for 2 full years. Let's all just take next year off.
And that never, ever happens in history.
It never happens. Because surplus does not create leisure. Surplus creates hierarchy.
Okay, you have to explain that mechanism. How does a pile of extra food lead to a king and a bureaucracy?
The classic anthropological example is the big man societies, say in Melanesia. In these societies, how does an ambitious leader gain status and power?
He doesn't hoard the wealth for himself.
No, that would be social suicide. He gains status by giving it away. He throws the biggest, most lavish feast.
He's the guy who gives away the most pigs and yams.
He is. But think about what that means. To have enough pigs and yams to give away in a giant feast, he has to compel his household, his wives, his children, his extended kin, to work harder than they would need to for their own simple survival.
So his status is built directly on the extraction of their excess labor.
Precisely. And as societies scale up, that big man dynamic just gets formalized. The big man becomes a chief, and the chief eventually becomes a king. The surplus doesn't go back to the people who produced it as free time. It goes to support a new class of people who do not work in the fields at all.
It supports the priesthood, the scribes, the administrators, the standing army.
All of these new specialized roles don't produce a single calorie. They consume the surplus that the farmers produce.
So the farmer's workload just doubled. Now he has to work enough to feed his own family, plus enough to feed the king, the soldier who protects the king, and the priest who legitimizes the king.
And so every single gain in agricultural productivity, every time we invented a better plow or figured out crop rotation or developed better fertilizer, it didn't result in the farmer getting to sit down and rest.
It resulted in the king building a bigger castle or the priesthood building a grander temple.
Or a larger army to go conquer the neighboring kingdom. The productivity gains are consistently redistributed upward and outward into new layers of societal complexity. They are almost never, ever returned to the worker as free time.
That phrase, upward and outward into complexity, that feels painfully familiar. It sounds exactly like the modern corporate world. We made the software more efficient, and instead of everyone going home at 3 p.m., we just hired 3 more layers of middle management to have meetings about the new software.
Which brings us crashing right into the 20th and 21st centuries.
Section 4. The modern paradox and the Keynesian dream that never came true.
We have to talk about John Maynard Keynes, arguably the most influential economist of the 20th century.
And in 1930, right at the dawn of the Great Depression, he wrote this incredibly optimistic essay, Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren.
It's startling to read today because he looked at the trend lines, he saw the rate of capital accumulation, the astonishing pace of technological efficiency, and he made a very logical projection.
He predicted that by the time his grandchildren were grown, which is basically our generation, now we would have solved the economic problem.
The problem of basic scarcity. He argued we would be so fantastically productive, so wealthy, that we would only need to work about 15 hours a week.
A 15-hour work week.
And he genuinely worried that our biggest societal challenge would be figuring out what to do with all our free time. He was concerned about widespread nervous breakdowns from the psychological shock of having so much leisure.
And here's the crazy part. He was right about the productivity. We actually hit his targets for capital growth and efficiency decades ago.
We smashed them. We are, per capita, vastly more productive and wealthy than even his most optimistic projections.
But I am definitely not working 15 hours a week. Not even close. I'm checking Slack messages at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. So where did all that potential leisure time go?
According to the late anthropologist David Graeber, it went into what he called managerial feudalism.
This is his famous bullshit jobs theory.
It is. Graeber looked at the employment data for the last 50 years. As automation and efficiency absolutely gutted the number of jobs in agriculture and manufacturing, the workforce didn't just sit down and enjoy the fruits of that efficiency.
No, meaved it.
It migrated into this huge, ever-expanding administrative sector. The number of managers, clerks, and administrators just ballooned.
HR departments, PR, corporate law, financial services, strategic consulting, academic administration.
Graeber identified 5 basic types of these bullshit jobs. You have flunkies, people who are basically hired just to make their boss look and feel more important, like a doorman or a personal assistant to someone who doesn't need one.
Then you have goons.
Goons are people whose job has an aggressive element. Think corporate lobbyists, PR specialists who spin negative stories, telemarketers. They only exist because other companies also employ goons.
Box stickers is another one.
Yes. People who spend their entire day creating reports, filling out surveys, or running compliance modules just to allow an organization to claim it's doing something that in reality it's not actually doing.
And then taskmasters.
Middle managers whose only real job is to assign work to other people who could probably just do the work on their own. They exist to supervise.
There's a story Graeber tells that just perfectly illustrates this whole phenomenon. The story of the elephant tea factory in France.
It is a tragicomic masterpiece. This was a tea factory that, for a time, had been occupied and run by its own workers.
So the workers were in charge.
For years, they ran the whole operation themselves. They fixed the machines, they organized the shifts, they sourced the materials, they packed the tea, and by all accounts, it was a highly efficient, well-run operation.
And then the company's management took it back over.
And they brought in a whole new layer of efficiency managers. These were guys in suits with business degrees who didn't know the first thing about how to actually make tea, but they had high salaries, and they needed to justify their existence.
So what did they do?
They started inventing metrics. They demanded endless reports on productivity. They set up meetings to discuss the reports. They implemented new software to track the workers' movements.
They created an entire ecosystem of work that was about measuring the actual work.
And the workers who were actually making the tea, they said, These guys are just in the way. They're slowing us down. The entire efficiency layer was acting as a parasite on the actual productive core of the business.
But the system needed that layer to justify its own hierarchy.
It did. And Graeber points out that there's a kind of spiritual violence at the heart of this situation.
Spiritual violence, that's a heavy term.
It is. Think about it. If you are a nurse, a garbage collector, a teacher, a mechanic, your work is obviously and concretely useful. If you stopped doing your job, the world would get worse very quickly. And these are often the jobs that are squeezed the tightest, tracked, timed, and underpaid.
But if you're a synergy and communication strategy coordinator.
If you vanish from your desk for 6 months, it's possible nobody would even notice. In fact, things might actually run smoother because there's one less person calling meetings.
And the person in that job knows this on some level.
They know it, and that's the violence. They sit in a nice office, they earn a good salary, they command a certain amount of social respect, but deep down, in a place they can't admit, they suspect that their contribution to the world is zero, or maybe even negative.
That is the bullshitization of labor. It's the immense psychological toll of having to pretend to be useful all day.
It's profoundly destructive to the human soul. Humans have a deep, innate need to be a cause, to see the effect of our actions in the world. When you pour your life force into a PowerPoint presentation that you know will be archived and never opened again, it creates this deep, dissonant anxiety.
So this is the big question Graeber poses. Why does the system do this? Capitalism is supposed to be ruthlessly efficient. Why would it pay millions of people handsome salaries to do nothing of value?
Because, Graeber argues, the system as it currently exists is not primarily optimized for efficiency in the sense of least effort for most output. It's optimized for two other things: resource distribution and social control.
Social control.
If you have a society that produces a massive surplus, thanks to technology, robots, oil, etc., you have a political problem. You can't just give people the money and the free time. That violates the deeply ingrained Puritan ethic we talked about earlier. He who does not work shall not eat.
So you have to make them work for it, even if the work is pointless.
You invent work to validate the distribution of resources. The system ends up maximizing throughput and busyness, not human well-being or actual productivity.
This feels like the right moment to bring our final and perhaps most important layer into the conversation.
Yeah.
We've done the history, the anthropology, the economics. Now we need the physics of it. We need to explain why this whole situation feels so bad on a fundamental, maybe even neurological level.
This is where we apply the recursive coherence, or RC, lens from the Haven's white papers.
So let's take a moment and really define recursive coherence for the listener who hasn't encountered these papers before. What is it, simply put?
Simply put, RC is a measure of the alignment between four key things: time, attention, meaning, and obligation. It acts as a very simple question about any system. Do the loops close?
And in the papers, they talk about the ache.
Yes. The seed paper defines the ache not as pain, but as negentropic tension.
Okay, can we get that in plain English?
It's the drive to finish the pattern. It's that feeling you get when you hear a suspended chord in a piece of music. Your brain needs it to resolve to the root note. Life is a constant series of these tensions and resolutions. Hunger is an ache. Curiosity is an ache. The need to finish a sentence that you started is an ache.
So let's look at the hunter-gatherer one more time, but through this specific lens.
The hunter-gatherer, as we discussed, lived in a state of what RC would call episodic coherence. A tension arises in the system, the ache of hunger. A clear, meaningful action is taken, the hunt. A definitive resolution is achieved, eating and satiety. The loop closes, the ache is zeroed out.
The system resets to a baseline of calm.
Exactly. In RC terms, the wave function of potential hunger collapses into the definite state of I am fed. The brain can release the cognitive load of that open loop.
Now let's turn that lens on the modern office worker.
The modern office worker lives in a state of continuous incoherence. The loops never, ever close. You answer one email, and in the process of answering it, 3 more arrive. You finish a big project, and there's no pause, no celebration. You're just told you're already late for the kickoff meeting of the next one.
You have student debt, which is a massive open loop that stays active for 20 years. You have career anxiety, which is an infinite loop because the goal of success is never fully defined or achieved.
It's a constant, dissonant cacophony of suspended chords that never resolve.
And the technology, the smartphone we started with, it just makes this 1,000 times worse.
It's the engine of incoherence. The intellection paper, which talks about the fundamental unit of recursive awareness, argues that for a conscious agent to stabilize, for you to feel like a sane, coherent person, you need boundaries. You need a clear on state and a clear off state.
But the smartphone completely destroyed the off state.
It created a permanent state of what you could call infinite potential availability. Because you could receive a work email or a Slack notification at 9 p.m. on a Saturday, a part of your brain's processing power is now permanently allocated to maintaining a readiness potential. You are never fully resting, you are just in a low-power standby mode 24/7.
That explains the deep, bone-deep exhaustion so many people feel. It's not the work itself that's so tiring. It's the enormous energetic cost of constantly maintaining that standby mode.
Correct. And this is what the paper calls the field print. Your intelligence, your well-being, isn't just a thing inside your skull. It's a field condition that exists between you and your environment. When your environment, like a modern corporation, is structured around a principle of infinite growth and infinite availability, it begins to cannibalize your field print.
It treats you as an infinitely mineable resource, rather than as a pattern that needs to find completion and rest.
That is the core of the tragedy. A system that is optimized for infinite growth is, by its very definition, a system without a stop condition. It's a recursive loop that hangs, that never terminates. And we are the processors that are stuck inside that hung loop, spinning and burning energy for nothing.
This is all quite heavy, but we have to look forward. Why does this analysis matter so much right now in this particular moment in history?
Because we are on the verge of handing this broken, incoherent system a nuclear weapon of efficiency. Artificial intelligence.
The automation horizon.
Think about the patterns we've just laid out. What did surplus create? Not leisure, but complexity and hierarchy. What did the efficiency of the Industrial Revolution create? Not shorter workdays, but more administrative work to fill the time.
So if AI reduces the cost of generating text, code, images, and reports to basically zero,
we risk an unprecedented explosion of what you might call synthetic bureaucracy. We won't get a 3-day work week. We will get AI systems generating millions of pages of reports, which will then require humans or other AIs to read, summarize, and manage them.
we will see the bullshit jobs phenomenon multiplied by a factor of 1,000. We will be hired to supervise machines that are generating meaningless paperwork for other machines to process.
We'll be drowning in a tidal wave of generated content, frantically trying to manage a system that is running at the speed of light and producing nothing of real value.
Unless we consciously change the fundamental structure of the loop.
That is the final provocation for our listeners today.
We have, for all intents and purposes, solved the ancient problem of scarcity. As a civilization, we have enough food, enough shelter, enough stuff, but we have completely and utterly failed to solve the problem of coherence.
We don't know how to say enough.
The hunter-gatherer had a simple biological constraint that closed the loop. My belly is full. The modern economy has no such constraint. Its only command is more.
So the question we want to leave you with is this. If efficiency alone doesn't free us, and all the evidence suggests it won't, then what will? What would a life or a company or even a society look like if it were optimized not for infinite growth, but for closing loops?
So I want you to try a little experiment this week, just an observation. Start to notice your own open loops.
Notice when you finish a task, big or small, do you actually pause for a moment to feel the release, to let that little wave of coherence collapse and reset? Or does your mind immediately, frantically jump to the next thing on the to-do list?
Are you working for the task to get it done? Or are you working for the clock to fill the time?
Try to find your Saint Monday, even if it's not a whole day, even if it's just 1 hour where you consciously refuse to open a new loop. Find the reset.
Because if you don't find a way to close the loop will eventually close you. This has been The Deep Dive.
Stay coherent,